This is Forward Boldly. I'm Christine Niles. Welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles, and this is the show where we explore the riches of our Catholic faith and how it informs our daily lives. Tonight we have with us Father Roman Manchester. He's a priest of the Diocese of Providence, Rhode Island, and you know of him, of course, from the show Romanus Contra Mundum, which airs every other Friday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time on our network. So, Father, it's great to have you here tonight. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Christine. Thank you.
Father Roman is here to talk a little bit about his background and his very interesting conversion story. So let's go back to the very beginning. I understand you were raised in a Catholic home. Were your parents practicing Catholics, and how was the catechesis when you were a child?
Right. Both my parents were practicing Catholics. They're both still alive. My mother, she was Polish. She was Catholic, raised Catholic. My father was a convert, though. He converted when he married my mother. And I was raised in a Catholic household, but the catechesis was really kind of that 1970s, 1980s catechesis where we traded in our catechisms for a box of crayons, you know? And
Felt.
yeah, so I really had to learn from my parents, really, the basics of the faith. It was kind of reinforced in CCD classes, but really, if I didn't have the family catechesis, I really wouldn't have had much at all.
So you went to Catholic school then?
No, actually, I went to public schools. I was a product of the public schools, a Cranston public school system, from kindergarten through 12th grade. And I went to a state college.
Okay, so no, wait, Cranston, is that in Rhode Island? I'm not familiar with
Yes,
okay.
Cranston's in Rhode Island, yep.
Okay. Yeah,
yep.
You have that great Rhode Island accent. I love it. So did you know early on that you had a calling to the priesthood, or was that later on?
I started feeling it when I was probably about 13. My folks broke up. My parents divorced. And that used to be an impediment, actually. In the old days, having divorced parents was an impediment to the priesthood. But they had done away with that. But when my parents broke up, my father and I hadn't spoken to each other from the time I was 14 to 21. So I started gravitating more towards the church at that time, too, and I had good role models there, pastoral role models as priests. And that became my family, my surrogate family, the church. It always was part of my family life, but now it became even more so. And it just seemed natural for me to consider the priesthood. I think it was more natural back then than it is today. It just seemed like it was something that most kids did. It was an option, whereas today I think it's, people look at you like you've got 2 or 3 heads even if you tell them that you're thinking about becoming a priest. But when I was a kid, it wasn't that odd for a boy to consider being a priest.
So you went to college. What did you study when you were in college?
I had entered the seminary at age 18 after I graduated high school. And then I left halfway during my sophomore year at age 19. I finished college, Rhode Island College. I studied criminal justice. I wanted to be a police officer. That's what my father was. I finished my bachelor's in criminal justice. While I was in college, I entered the Air Force National Guard, and I went down to San Antonio to Lackland Air Force Base for basic training. And during training, I was injured. I had hurt my back in a training exercise, and I ended up spending a couple of months down there in medical hold before I was finally discharged. I came back to Rhode Island. I was kind of disappointed because my plan at that time was to finish college on the GI Bill and then make the military a career. I wanted to be an Air Force officer and follow that path. But much like St. Ignatius of Loyola, he had his kneecap blown off by a cannonball during the siege of Pamplona, and he had also wanted to be a soldier. But that injury ended his career, and it was during his convalescence that he only had one book to read. He wanted to have books about chivalry and all of that, but there was only one book available. It was on the lives of the saints. So it was during that period there that Ignatius decided to become a priest and become a soldier for Christ, a soldier for God. So I had kind of a similar experience, only once my military career was over due to the injury, I didn't quite embrace the priesthood yet. It still took a few more years for me to go back to the seminary.
Now, why did you originally leave the seminary? Did you just feel like you weren't ready?
You know, that's an interesting thing. People always used to ask me why I left the seminary. I would tell them it was celibacy, you know, and it really had nothing to do with celibacy. But I told them that because that was the simple answer, and I knew that they would accept that as an answer, and they wouldn't ask me any further questions. So,
whenever I told
them, yeah, right, exactly. You know, you tell them, oh, why'd you leave the seminary? I celibacy. Oh, I understand. You know, and that's it. So, right. But because I really didn't want to talk about the real reason why I left the seminary, and I mean, I can talk about it now. But the real reason was because I had, while I was in the seminary program for the diocese, I was attending the state college. And I had gotten involved in the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship on campus. It really was kind of the structure of the seminary program at the time really wasn't that great. I was in with about 16 other guys over the course of a year and a half, and none of us we all left the seminary. Not a single one of them went through to ordination. I eventually came back 7 years after I left. Well, I was at the Rhode Island College. I got involved with this Protestant Bible study group. I was kind of leery at first about it, but they told me, oh, we've got a Catholic in the group. Anyone can come to these things. It's no big deal. So I went in short order. First of all, the InterVarsity Fellowship was chock full of anti-Catholics. And they saw a Catholic, they saw a seminarian in their program, and I was like the gold ring, the prize. I was the prize hog at the county fair. And I became an automatic target for them. And, I hadn't received good catechesis throughout. I received parish catechesis throughout my childhood. I was a devout Catholic at the time. But my attachment was mostly emotional and mostly a cultural attachment. I was I guess you could consider me a patriotic Catholic, but I really didn't have much knowledge in my head. And they worked on that. And because I didn't have the proper intellectual formation at that point, I went down like dominoes, and they planted all these doubts in my head. And eventually, halfway through my sophomore year, I decided to leave the seminary. And I didn't feel like I could ask questions at the seminary. I thought, I was having all of these anti-Catholic ideas put in my head. When you're having those doubts, a lot of times for teenagers, like 18, 19-year-old people, they have a hard time approaching a priest or an authority figure who might give them some answers. I remember my own mindset back then was that, if I ask any questions, I'm going to get into trouble because they're going to, think that I'm, I didn't know what they were going to think about me, but I thought that I was going to get in trouble for even asking those types of questions. So instead, I just kind of abandoned any hope of ever having answers, and I left the seminary, and then I kind of just drifted away from the faith altogether. Although I continued to go to church, I was a regular churchgoer with my mother, and eventually I would come back to the Catholic Church. But
did you ever actually become anti-Catholic, or? Yes.
You
did. Okay.
After I left the seminary, I drifted away, and I kind of became apathetic towards the faith altogether. After I graduated college, I went to work for AT&T in Providence. I was working in a call center, and one of my friends from work invited me and a bunch of other coworkers to go to her church, where she was a former Catholic as well, and she invited me to go to her Assemblies of God Pentecostal church for a Thursday night prayer meeting. So I went. I kind of had been away from faith really for several years at this point, and I thought something told me that maybe God is calling me back.
Now, so how long at this point? How old were you? How long had you been away from the faith?
Let's see. I left the seminary when I was 19, and now I was 23, maybe 20. Yeah, I think it was 22. So it's about 4 years in between. So when I went to the Pentecostal church, I was being re-immersed in the anti-Catholic world. I didn't know it, but they brought me in, and it was very charismatic too. The Pentecostals are very charismatic, and they were into that whole Toronto Airport Vineyard movement, similar to the Brownsville Revival in Florida, and it's all kind of crazy, loopy stuff, where you're barking at the moon and nutty stuff. Decided that wasn't for me, but I had stuck with that for about a year, And I just said, this isn't really my pace. I need something that's more rooted in history with more of an intellectual foundation. So I gravitated towards the Presbyterian Church. I wasn't there too long before I connected with the pastor of a small church that was an offshoot of the Presbyterian Church. It was the Christian Missionary Alliance. And by this time I had already been studying Lutheran theology and Calvinist theology for about 2-3 years. I had become so steeped in Lutheran and Calvinist theology just through personal study. I had become better at the anti-Catholic shtick than most of the professional anti-Catholics. And one of the pastors, he was so impressed with me that he wanted to help me start a ministry to pull Catholics out of the church and bring them over to, the Bible-believing church. So I was on board with him at the beginning, but I had realized as I was about to begin this so-called ministry to Catholics, something told me that I needed to start reading more Catholic resources and not just anti-Catholic sources. Up until that point, I had just been reading, basically anti-Catholic propaganda. And it all made sense, because I didn't have the intellectual formation at this point. It seemed to make sense that, they seemed to latch on to superficial things and interpret it in bizarre ways that seemed to make sense. But I figured, well, I better start reading more Catholic sources. And I was up at this mall in Attleboro, Massachusetts, right over the line, the state line, and I was in the bookstore up there, and I saw a book on one of the shelves in the religion section. It was a book I'd seen I don't know how many times before, countless times before, but I never felt compelled to pick it up. And but this time I did. Something said, read this book, pick it up. It's kind of like St. Augustine, tolle lege, tolle lege. And when he saw the Bible, he heard that voice that said, pick up and read, take and read. But this book wasn't the Bible. It was a book by Kevin Johnson called Why Do Catholics Do That? And it was a very simple, very basic book, but I read it, and immediately I began to see that most of my objections to the Catholic faith were into Catholic practice and devotional life was a straw man argument. I mean, everything that I had been fed from the anti-Catholics, Protestants, was really just nothing more than a straw man argument. And then it's like what Fulton Sheen had said. He said there aren't 100 people in the United States that hate the Catholic Church, but there are literally millions who hate what they mistakenly believe the Church to be. And I was one of those millions that hated what I had mistakenly thought the Church to be. So I read another book. The next book was Catholic and Christian by Alan Schreck. And then I read St. Augustine's Confessions, and then I got into more apologetic things like Scott Hahn and Patrick Madrid, and I started devouring everything I got my hands on, whether it was a book, an audio tape, a DVD. Well, we didn't have DVDs back then. It was VHS. So I devoured everything I could get my hands on, and I just absorbed all the information I could. And within a period of about a month, 2 months, I had thoroughly converted my mind. My conversion was an intellectual conversion. It wasn't an emotional one. It wasn't. I didn't have a St. Paul on the road to Damascus experience, but it was an intellectual conversion. And once I realized that the reason that I had left the seminary was because of these objections in the first place, and once I realized that the reason I left the seminary in the first place was no longer a reason, I felt the interior voice again inside me saying, it's time to go back. It's time to go back. So, and I responded immediately. Literally, as soon as I realized I was hearing that voice to go back to the seminary, I called the seminary. They said, why don't you come and visit us with this group? And so I started going to their monthly meetings. I think it was in October or November in 1998. So I started going to those meetings. And then after just maybe 3 or 4 meetings, I was ready to apply to the seminary, and they received me. And now at this point, too, I wasn't sure, because I had lived kind of, in those 7 years between the time I left and the time I had gone back, there were a few years in there where I had lived kind of like an Augustinian life, let's say, and and I wasn't sure that the pre-conversion years,
right.
and I wasn't sure if the call to the priesthood was real or not, so I wanted to put it to the test. And part of the application process to the seminary is that you have to write an autobiography. So I wrote down everything that I had ever done, and I basically tried to sabotage my own application, saying, all right, Lord, all this stuff should keep me out of the seminary, but if this call is real, it won't. So I wrote down everything I ever did. And
kind of like a challenge to God.
Yeah, exactly, a challenge. I said, God, all right, if you really want me to be a priest, this won't stand in the way. So I wrote it down, I put my application in, and lo and behold, they accepted me. So I went into the seminary, and then I ran into several obstacles throughout the seminary, though, too, where I got to the point where I just had to say, God, this is your idea, not mine. If you still want me to be a priest, this obstacle is you're going to have to do something about it.
Now, as far as your seminary, was it pretty orthodox or?
Yeah, it had changed a lot since my first stint and my second one. The second one, they had completely reformed the seminary in Providence. The first year, it was an older house. There was only, I think, 6 or 7 seminarians, and I think it was 7 of us, and 6 of us eventually went on to ordination. That's amazing. The first time I had gone through, there was 16, and nobody went through to ordination. The second one, I was one of 7, and 6 went through to ordination, so it was a much better program. And I spent 1 year in Providence doing some philosophy and theology at Providence College. And then I went to Boston, to St. John's Seminary, and I had originally been assigned there to enter first theology, but when I went there, they had just started to enforce a policy that they had. They hadn't enforced it previously, but this was the year they just happened to start enforcing it. And the policy was that they would not accept anyone into first theology unless they had gone through 2 years of pre-theology, which is what they call the philosophical studies. And so I'd only gone through 1 year of pre-theology now, and they were being sticklers, and they wanted me to do a second year of pre-theology. Anyway, I reported that back to Bishop McManus, he's now the Bishop of Worcester, Massachusetts, but he was the rector of the seminary in Providence at the time. And so he was upset about that. At that point, they had offered me another seminary assignment, but I had said, nah, you know what, this is what they wanted me to do. I'll go through with it, and I'll do another year of pre-theology. So after that, I did a year. First, I did my first year of graduate theology at St. John's as well, but that wasn't one of the obstacles that I had considered. My real obstacle was the after my first year at St. John's, the faculty advisor that I had chosen at the beginning of the year turned against me when it came time to vote on me for admission into first year of graduate theology.
Now, why did he turn against you?
Well, actually, it was a woman, but I thought we had a good relationship. I mean, I was honest and open with her about everything. But at the end of the year, on Good Friday of all days, Chris Coyne, who was the director of the pre-theology program, now he's a
auxiliary
bishop.
Auxiliary bishop in Indianapolis.
Right. Yeah. He was he's a Boston priest originally, and he was the director of the pre-theology program. Me and him, we were pretty good friends up there. I haven't seen him in several years now, but so he comes to me on Good Friday and knocks on my door and goes, Roman, I hate to bring this to you on Good Friday of all days, but you got a no vote on the board. So I said, what? He says, yeah, you got a no vote. There's a couple of things you can do. He said you can either let your application to the graduate seminary go through with the no vote on your record, or you can go before the full board and have, it's like an inquisition, subject yourself to all their questions and try to answer them as best as you can. So I asked what he suggested, and he said, well, it's probably not a good idea to put your application in with a no vote. So they weigh that heavily. So I went in front of the board after Easter. I came back to the seminary, and I went before the board, the full board. And it consisted of priests from the theologate, which is the graduate side, and also from lay professors from the college side. And now I didn't know anyone from the college side, but my faculty advisor, she was from the college. And so I answered all of their questions. Monsignor Lennon at the time was rector of the seminary, and he had just been promoted to bishop. So there's the two guys that are really key in this whole thing were Bishop Lennon and Bishop Coyne. After I went through the grilling session and I answered all their questions, Chris Coyne told me to go out and sit in his office while they voted on me again. So he comes out after about 15 minutes. He came into the office and he goes, I got some good news and some bad news. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, the bad news is you had one no vote when you went into that meeting, and now it went up to 3 no votes.
Oh, no.
I said, what do you mean? And he goes, yeah, your faculty advisor, she really stabbed you in the back. He goes, I'm not supposed to be telling you any of this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. So he said she managed to get 2 other no votes from the college side, people I didn't even know, and they didn't know me. Again, it was a political it was a political tug of war.
Now, what did she not like about you?
She had said apparently that she didn't think that I was being honest enough with her, that I had been hiding things from her. And I mean, I was telling her everything. So I don't really know what her problem was with me, because everything that she had said against me were things that I thought that I was, I'm an open book. Anyone who knows me knows that I'm an open book. And maybe she was suspicious of that. I don't know. Chris Coyne at the time, this is before he was bishop, obviously, he said, so your 1 no vote went to 3 no votes. And I'm like, this didn't help me at all, then. And he goes, but Bishop Lennon stood up for you, and he's told them that they better change their vote if they know it was good for them.
Oh, good. And, God bless him.
Yeah, he said, I know this man. I've been living with him for a year in the seminary, and I know his bishop, and he went on, and so he basically read them the Riot Act, and he got them to change the vote. So, yeah, so it was. I have to credit my vocation to Bishop Lennon at that point. Wow. It could have stopped dead in its tracks at that point, but Bishop Lennon and Bishop Coyne as well. But after that whole experience, I did go into first theology at St. John's, and I went through my first year of theology there, and I had a great year, and I was ready to go through to second theology. But then when I got home for the summer after the academic year ended, my vocation director called me in, and he said, Roman, how do you feel about going to New Jersey, Seton Hall? And I said, now that had been my first choice, actually. If he had asked me that 2 years ago, I would have jumped at the opportunity. But I told him, well, I know we started off kind of rocky at St. John's, but I've really settled in there, and I'm comfortable there, and I've made friends, and I wouldn't mind staying there for the next 3 years. And he goes, well, you're going to New Jersey. So that's when I realized that when they ask you a question, they're really not asking you, they're telling you.
Right.
So when they say, how do you feel about going to such and such a place, they're really telling you that you're going there. They're just giving you an opportunity to say, oh, that would be great. And so you learn a lot through these years. But so I said, okay, well, I didn't even have a chance to say goodbye to any of my friends because the academic year had ended already, and started my next year, second theology, at Seton Hall, which was Immaculate Conception Seminary, and that was a great place too. I had a great seminary experience there, but I also ran into some issues there as well. During my third year of theology, this is something that's kind of bizarre, actually. I was preparing to be ordained a deacon in June of that year. One night when I was asleep in my dorm room, I had it was a real bizarre experience. I even kind of hesitate to talk about this, but I woke up about 3 o'clock in the morning. I was actually having a dream. I was asleep and I was dreaming that I imagined that I was in Indiana because there was just nothing around. I was in the middle of like this plain, this field, and there was nothing around. There was just like a little grove of oak trees, and there was this big house in the middle of this field, and there were people in the house, and they were stockpiling guns, and there were these storm clouds on the horizon that were moving in. And I went into the house, I went upstairs to the second floor. They were moving around like bees, busy bees, and I was asking them, why are they stockpiling guns? And they said, oh, there's a war coming. I got a feeling that guns aren't going to do you any good in this type of war. And then I woke up. It felt like there was a creature on my back. This is what actually woke me up. It felt like there was a claw. I felt something, an animal with sharp claws, was digging into my back over my left shoulder. that I knew right away what it was. I suspected it was a demon, only I had never been attacked like this before. So I started praying the rosary. I was sleeping on my right side, facing the wall, and I didn't have my rosary on me, obviously. I don't sleep with it. I started praying the rosary on my fingers. Started off all right, but over time, it felt like this creature was burrowing into my head mentally. I started forgetting the prayers, the words to the prayers, the Our Father and the Hail Mary. And I realized this thing is trying to like control my thoughts. I was just amazed that I couldn't remember the words of the simplest prayers that I learned when I was a kid. So I battled through that, and eventually around 6 o'clock in the morning, I finished the rosary. It took about 3 hours to pray it, though. I got to the end, the very end, and I couldn't remember the words to the Hail Holy Queen, so I couldn't even begin it. But for some reason, I could pray it in Latin. So I prayed the Salve Regina, and I got through it with no problem. Immediately after I finished the Salve Regina, the spirit, whatever it was, disappeared. It vanished as quickly as it had come to me. And now at this point, I just got up and got ready for chapel. So I went to my spiritual director, his name is Monsignor Anthony Figueredo. He was a personal assistant to Pope John Paul II, but now he was back at the seminary, and he was my spiritual director. So I told him about it. He was the only one I told about it at the time, but he didn't doubt me at all. He didn't look at me like I was nuts. I was afraid he was going to think I was nuts. He said to me, that the closer you get to ordination, the stronger the attacks will get. And now Monsignor Figueredo is really a solid guy. Like I said, he was an assistant to John Paul II, and he's in Rome right now, actually, too. He's running the sabbatical programs at the North American College.
Well, thank God for a good advisor.
Right, yeah, he was great. He was a great spiritual advisor. And
someone who takes spiritual warfare seriously and knows that evil really does exist.
Yeah, Satan is a real personal being. He's not like the force. He's real, and he hates us. And
Absolutely. I certainly don't doubt you in any way. I've had 3 exorcists on my show, and spiritual warfare is very real. I've experienced myself some very strange things.
Right. The closer you get to God, too, the worse the attacks get. The devil hates that. Though the ending of this whole experience, I thought this was the end of it. This was in March of 2003 that this happened, and it was just before I went on a pilgrimage to France with the seminary and with Monsignor Figueredo. He was Father Figueredo at the time. He got Monsignor later on, but he was the pilgrimage leader as well to France. We went to the shrines of France, from Lourdes to Lisieux and everywhere in between. So when we were in Ars, which is about a half an hour outside of Lyon.
Right, that's the home of, that's where St. Jean-Marie Vianney
Right, yep, exactly. And there's a pontifical seminary there. It's the Pontifical Seminary of John Paul II, I believe it was. And most of the guys that we were with stayed there. They had extra rooms, they had enough space, but there were about 4 or 5 of us that they couldn't put up. So I was in that group that had to stay inside the village itself. And they were like modular apartments, across the street from the church where St. John Vianney was pastor. So anyway, I stayed there for 2 nights. When I flipped off the light to go to bed, I immediately felt this evil presence from outside the bedroom window. And so I flipped the light back on. I felt like something was watching me from outside the window. And so I flipped the light back on, and everything was okay again. And I did this 3 times. And each time I did, this thing came back, and when I turned the light on, it went away. So I ended up sleeping with the light on that night. So that was kind of weird that it happened in Ars itself, where John Vianney himself experienced all these weird things. As time went on, after I was ordained a deacon...
Well, wait a second. I want you to tell about your experience in Lisieux.
Oh, okay, yeah, you know about that, right?
Tears, yeah.
Okay, great. We were in Lisieux. I got to tell my friend Larry Swink, he's a priest in Washington, D.C., the Archdiocese, and we were on the pilgrimage together, and he was excited about going to Lisieux. But he's a former ball player, and he's got this kind of like the ball player mentality, and you have to be a ball player, I guess, to understand that. But he was telling some folks, French people, that we had met where we were going, and he was trying to tell them we were going to Lisieux, and he kept saying, we're going to Lisieux. And they didn't know what he was talking about, Lasue.
Yes.
Lasue. So he's like, yeah, we're going to Lasue. And
The American way.
right. Going to go see St. Teresa of Lasue. And so I overheard him. I said, Larry, it's Lisieux. And then the people go, they go, oh yeah, Lisieux. So they knew what we were talking about. So it was so funny. Larry, I love Larry to death. But so we get to Lasue, and we weren't going to the Carmel where Saint Therese spent her time there. It was a cloistered convent, so we couldn't go into the cloister. We could only go into the chapel, and there was a little museum outside the convent wall itself. Not much bigger than a garage, a single-car garage. But my spiritual director, again, it was Father Figueiredo, he convinced the Mother Superior to let some of us in who were going to be ordained that year. And I was going to be ordained a deacon, and she allowed those who were being ordained to go into the cloister itself. Now, only ordained people can go into the cloister. They don't let lay people in there, so that's why he managed to talk her into letting us in, though. So the first stop we went was the room where she died. And they had preserved the room perfectly, as it was the day she died. Everything in the room is original except for the mattress. They had to burn that because, she had tuberculosis. But the bed frame is still the same bed frame. It's like cast iron. So I went in there, and the whole group is gathered around this bed, and I'm right near the headboard. And all of a sudden, for no reason, I start crying. I wasn't sad. I didn't feel like crying. It's just like the tears were coming out of my eyes, and I'm like, what the heck is going on here? So I just kind of got on my knees, and I started praying. And one of the nuns, she sees all this going on, so she comes through with a box of Kleenex, like she expected this to happen. And, she just happened to have a box of Kleenex with her. So she hands me the box of tissue paper, and she says, don't worry, it happens all the time. She says, it's the gift of tears. And she said that, then she said, St. Therese has chosen you. She's going to be your patron. She's going to watch over you in your priesthood. And so ever since then, and I didn't even have a real devotion to her at that time. I knew who she was, but I was just, I really kind of had expected something to happen in Lourdes, and nothing did happen. And I'd kind of been looking for a real positive spiritual experience. I was looking for the experience, throughout the whole trip, some kind of sign. And nothing happened. Lisieux was like one of the last stops on the trip, and by that time I had given up on expecting anything. And I was just kind of going along to enjoy the sights. And that's when it hit me, when St. Therese really kind of affected me in that room.
Isn't that funny how the saints choose you? And what's really funny, too, is that St. Therese herself talks about how she had visited the tomb of St. Cecilia, or I can't remember if it's St. Cecilia or St. Agnes, but one of those. And she said that she'd never had any kind of devotion to them, didn't even really know anything about them. But after that trip, for some reason, she felt very strongly that they had like made clear to her that, they had chosen her and were watching over her in a special way. So that's neat how St. Therese has chosen you. She's such a wonderful saint, too.
Oh, she is, boy. Yeah, after that, I read her autobiography. I was interested in her after that, for sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's great. I think, I forget if it was St. Augustine or somebody had said at one time, it was a great thing, said, you don't choose your patron saint, they choose you. Right. And that was the day that St. Therese chose me, and it was really, it wasn't part of, I had nothing to do with it. It was all St. Therese, so she's been looking over me all these years now, and I keep trusting in her, trusting that she'll look over me, send me a few roses once in a while, Once in a while,
didn't you have also some problems with a fellow seminarian or something before your ordination?
Oh, yeah, actually, it wasn't a seminarian. It was one of the formation staff.
He was kind of liberal, right? Progressive?
Yeah. This was after I had before I go into that, when I got back from France, I was ordained a deacon, and then that summer I had some more preternatural phenomena happen to me, and I was trying to keep it a secret, but my pastor realized that something was bothering me, so he dragged it out of me. I ended up getting a pastoral year out of it, and I had to go for psychiatric evaluation.
Oh, dear.
So, they're like, this stuff doesn't happen. So they sent me to get checked for schizophrenia.
Oh, gosh.
And so I met with a psychiatrist. He was able to tell right away. He said, I can tell you're not schizophrenic. he knows how to spot them, I guess. So we ended up talking about the Red Sox most of our sessions. I don't know if the diocese would like to hear that. They paid big money for the sessions. And I also met with a psychologist as well over the course of the whole year that I was out of the seminary and in a parish for that year. But after I got cleared, psychologically and psychiatrically and a lot of stuff, I went back to the seminary, finished my 4th year of theology, and was preparing for ordination when I was scheduled to give the last homily of the year, and I was giving a homily at evening prayer in the chapel that night. And also the gospel reading had been from John's gospel, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. So I kind of joined those three things together and created a homily that was really, it was an edgy homily, but it was strong, and the seminarians loved it. And like I say, about 99% of the guys in the seminary loved it. But the associate academic dean, I won't mention his name, he had a real problem with the homily, and he went on a vendetta, a personal mission to stop my ordination. He went to my he called my pastor in to ask him about, what I had, what my preaching was like in the parish, and he was really trying to go after me. But I had already been called to orders at this point, so he really couldn't do anything. And even his own faculty, people were telling him to cool his jets. The faculty he ended up having a special faculty meeting called just to address my homily. Now, I had been handing out copies of it because guys were coming up to me asking for copies of the homily. So I was handing them out, And then after the faculty meeting, my faculty advisor at Seton Hall, he's a great guy, Father Blumenfeld. I gave him a copy. I gave him a copy of the homily too. He read it and he said, "I don't see anything wrong with this." And but he said, the faculty at the meeting, they asked me if I could, if not to distribute any more copies of the homily. So basically, my homily was banned at Seton Hall. And they said no more copies. Don't give any more out. So I agreed to that. I said, okay, I won't hand out any more copies. But that didn't stop the request. The guys kept asking if they could get a copy of the homily. But I told them, I can't give you a copy, but I know who has a copy.
And look, some is done.
So I would point them in the right direction, and my friends continued to distribute the homily, but I never gave out another copy of it myself. But I got banned at Seton Hall by my homily. So it was really basically it was a homily encouraging faithfulness to the magisterium. And
wow, revolutionary.
Yeah, really, you think, because it was the third theology guys are preparing to be ordained deacons, and they were going to take their oath of fidelity, and so it kind of fit in, the whole message and the theme that Christ is the only way to the Father. Pope Benedict had talked about the dictatorship of relativism, and I encouraged the deacon class to be faithful to the magisterium, and for some reason that didn't go over well with this guy. So that was my final obstacle before ordination, though. So I ran into those three: one at St. John's, one with the pastoral year that I got, and the third one was right before the end when I was ordained.
It seems that if your vocation is authentic, whether it be to marriage or to the priestly vocation, it's going to be tested pretty severely. Yeah. It's always tested.
Absolutely.
Just to see if it's authentic.
Yeah, absolutely. And with each time I ran into an obstacle, I just kept telling God, this was your idea, not mine. If you really want me to be a priest, you're going to have to move this roadblock. And I just continued to do what was required of me. I didn't just sit back and do nothing, but I went through what was required of me, and eventually the roadblocks, they did fall. They fell on their own, it seemed, but it was really, this is the whole deal. This is when I was going through seminary, and even to this day, whenever I run into obstacles, now it's a little bit different because I am a priest, but when I was going through the seminary, every time I ran into something, I just said, God, this is your work, not mine. And now that I am a priest, I do still occasionally run into obstacles, and the devil is obviously still out there trying to get me, as he's trying to get all priests. But whenever I run into a serious obstacle, I put it in God's hands and say, this was your idea. You got me into this. I'm just trying to be as pliable in your hands, and I just trust God, and He somehow always works something out. That's,
Wonderful.
I think, what we have to realize, too, is that the vocation starts with God and ends with God. And, I'll be a priest as long as He wants me to, and, I'm not going to leave, believe me. I know that I'm not supposed to. I know exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. There are more signs and more affirmations about my vocation throughout seminary and now as a priest, too, that I have no doubt that I'm doing the right thing with my life.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that obstacles don't still come, and that doesn't mean that I still don't, dream about running away from it all and just buying a boat and sailing around the world.
Well, I mean, even St. John Vianney ran away 3 times and then decided to turn around. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
Yeah. He just wanted to go off and, be a monk somewhere.
Right. That's what I tell the bishop. I had a recent skirmish with somebody that got on the news, and I just told him, the monastery is looking better and better.
Yeah.
And but I wouldn't. Well, maybe I would go to the monastery, but but still, I think any sane person imagines or dreams or fantasizes about what it would be like just to run away from it all and go sit on a beach in the Caribbean somewhere and just forget about everything. But not that I would ever do that, but I think everybody just thinks about running away from their problems at some point or another. Sure. And I think just to keep your sanity, you have to have that kind of happy place,
right.
Where you can think, all right, if it gets bad enough,
right. Now, you mentioned that you had a pretty neat sign of confirmation that sort of was related to St. John Paul II.
Right. Yes. It was my final year when I was going through this final obstacle in the seminary where the associate academic dean was coming after me. I had gone back to my parish for one last week of masses there, and I wasn't supposed to go back that week. The assignment had officially ended at that point. But I was still down there, and I figured I'm going to go in. What's the big deal? And it happened to be the weekend that John Paul had died, and we were all having a moment of silence after every Mass to pray for him. By the end of the last Mass on Sunday, I had decided during the moment of silence that I wasn't going to pray for him, but I was going to pray to him. And I just prayed. I said, Holy Father, I've been through so much in the seminary. It seems like I run into obstacle after obstacle after obstacle, and is God trying to tell me something? Is He just trying to tell me this is your chance to bail out? Am I not supposed to be a priest? I said, if I am supposed to be a priest, then give me a sign. And I was coming up against it now because ordination was a month and a half away. And so after I asked for that sign, 5 minutes later I got it. I received it. It happened so quickly and so convincingly that I almost missed it when it happened. I didn't expect him to answer that quickly. But after the moment of silence ended, Monsignor Hanrahan was the name of the pastor, and he did the closing prayer, and we sang the hymn, and we walked out the church down the aisle. And he had asked me before we left the sanctuary. He asked me if I could go off to the work sacristy. By the time I got out of the work sacristy, everyone in the church had bailed out. They were all gone now, and it was just me and Monsignor Hanrahan and maybe a couple other people at the top of the stairs. The church itself was in Summit, New Jersey. It was St. Teresa of Avila Church. And St. Teresa is on the top of a hill in a place called Summit, of all places, right? And it's a large Gothic-style church. The staircase goes down, it's a large staircase goes down, and there's a plaza, and then on the other side of the plaza, the stairs continue to go down to the street. And I noticed this woman coming up from the street, up the stairs towards me, and I'm thinking, who is this? She's coming back for some reason. And she reaches me, and she asks me if I can introduce her to the organist, because he played a couple of songs that were, dear to John Paul II. So we started a conversation that way. And turns out she's from Poland, and she said that she was from Jersey City, which is like an hour away from Summit with traffic. She just happened to be passing through that day, and she went to Mass, but she wasn't from that parish. She told me that she was a personal friend of John Paul II's, that she was confirmed by him in Krakow when he was the Archbishop of Krakow. And I'm thinking to myself, well, this can't be true. What are the odds of this? And then she pulls out of her pocketbook an envelope full of Polaroids, snapshots of her with John Paul II when he was the Archbishop of Krakow. And she was younger in the picture, obviously, but I could tell it was the same person. And she also said that her father was a cabinet maker who made furniture for John Paul when he was Archbishop, and that they were family friends. And I'm just thinking to myself, what are the odds? I just asked for a sign. 5 minutes later, here's a personal friend of the Pope's coming up to me and showing me photographs of her with him. And I'm like, whoa, what? This is amazing. Yeah, I got that sign, and I just said, okay, I'm never going to doubt this again now.
Right.
So, and I never have. So even now, when I have like the worst things happen to me, I remember that incident, and I go, okay, no, I got positive confirmation at that point.
Right.
And God doesn't change His mind. So
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah. It's
That's
just
fascinating conversion story. Thank you.
Yeah. And just the all throughout seminary too, the conversion was a strong conversion. And I said it was an intellectual conversion, kind of like John Henry Newman, where he, I already loved the Lord. I never had any doubts about Jesus, but my problem was with the church. But then I eventually came around to loving the church as much as I love Christ, and realizing that you can't separate Christ from the church. He's the bridegroom, she's the bride, and you can't divorce the two. So once I came to that conclusion, I knew that I had to go to the seminary. And St. Vincent de Paul, I believe it was St. Vincent de Paul, who once said, once you've discerned God's will for your life, don't hesitate to follow it. And that was kind of a confirmation, too, because I had thought, well, maybe I entered the seminary a little quickly. Maybe it was just like an impulsive decision I made. But after I entered the seminary, I found out a couple of years later about that quote from St. Vincent de Paul, don't hesitate at all. Once you've discerned God's will, just do it. Like Nike says, just do it. Right? So, and don't hesitate at all, because and I had reasons to hesitate. I could have paid off. I had quite a bit of debt before I went into the seminary, and I could have easily used that as an excuse. I could have said, well, I need to pay off all my debts and all this before I do. It's going to be a couple of years, but instead, what I did was I sold off all my stock options with the company. I had U.S. savings bonds. I cashed them all out early, and I sold my car. I did everything. I sold everything and paid off everything, and I went into the seminary. So
and he's taken care of you ever since.
Yeah, he's taken care of me ever since then.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. I think he doesn't want us to be rash or imprudent, but there is a sense in which he wants us to act with holy audacity, especially where we know that it's his will, and sometimes we do have to take a leap of faith and just trust.
Right.
But, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I read a really good article, and I want to get your feedback on this, where this person was saying how there's a problem today with a lot of indecisiveness among people. He noticed that there are people who are saying things like, well, I'm trying to discern whether or not to go to the seminary, or I'm trying to discern whether or not to date this girl. And the discerning goes on for months and it turns into years. And he's just like, you know what? Just do it. Go to seminary. And if God doesn't want you to go there, then he'll shut the door and then it'll be closed and then you'll do something else. Don't just wait indecisively for years waiting. And same thing, date the girl. Just date her. It doesn't mean you're going to marry her. If God doesn't want you to marry her, he'll shut the door on that too. But what if he does want you to marry her? Go ahead and just do it and see what happens. Don't stay stuck in this indecisiveness. Just go and act. And God will, lead you in the right direction.
Very good point. Yep. Seminary is the place for discernment. If someone's discerning, then you've got to go into the seminary. You can't discern from outside the seminary. And just like discerning marriage, you can't decide to marry someone before you've dated them. So, but unless it's an arranged marriage, but we don't do that anymore.
Holy audacity. It takes a certain amount of courage, but
right. You got to take action. Some people, I think. I don't know. There's always a temptation, I think, to it's out of fear, to use discernment as an excuse to not do anything.
Right.
So I'm still discerning. But there comes somebody had told me after, that during the seminary is the time for discernment. After you're ordained a priest, the discernment is over. So, because several priests have left the priesthood, claiming discernment, further discernment. And, the time for discerning was in the seminary.
That's right. That's right.
Not when, after you're ordained, it's over. There's no more discernment.
Right. There's no more discernment once you get married. I mean, that's it.
Exactly, right. Yeah. The time for discernment is during the betrothal period, the dating period. After you're married, it's it. It's over.
Yeah.
So, but I think there's that's something that's important to really realize, too, is that once you've made the decision and made the oath, the discernment phase is over. You're doing whatever you're doing now for the rest of your life, Because I think the devil tries to play on our minds, plays tricks on our minds, and thinks that, maybe I made the wrong decision.
Yeah, doubts.
And he'll always try to put doubts in your mind after the fact. So if you spend those years of discernment wisely, then there shouldn't be any doubt after you've made the decision either to marry or to go into the religious life or the priesthood. Like I say, the watershed mark was that sign I got on the top of the hill in a place called Summit. When John Paul the Great gave me that sign at St. Teresa of Avila Church, I took that and I never looked back. Right. And also thinking about all of the other things that happened too, with St. Therese and those are two great signs that I got right there, St. Therese. And those were happening in the same year. That happened within a couple months of each other. No, actually, it was a year apart. They happened a year apart from each other. But, there was two powerful signs from two great saints.
Yeah. Well, you're a very good priest, and I'm very glad that you're part of our network, that we kind of ran into each other. That was sort of providential, too.
It was. That really was. Yeah.
But,
we've become friends, too, in a time. That's great.
Yeah.
Great. Yep.
But we're running out of time, so we're going to have to end the program. But you can catch Father Manchester every other Friday right here on the Forward Boldly Network at his show, Romanus Contra Mundum. Very feisty commentary, very outspoken and opinionated and straight shooter. So that's
the only way I know how to shoot.
That's exactly it. Thanks, Father, for talking about your background, your conversion, very interesting vocation story.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, signing off, I'm Christine Niles. And remember that you can find more about our network and access all our archived shows at forwardboldly.com. You can also check out our podcast at the Regina Magazine blog, found at blog.reginamag.com. Okay, keep fighting the good fight of the faith. And in the words of St. Joan of Arc, in God's name, forward boldly.